Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm going to be talking about Big Brother Canada 12, which is at the moment presumably going to be the final season of the series. And I'm going to give you my brief thought on the cancellation now, and then I'll most likely make another video addressing it. I am not surprised that the show has been cancelled. As everyone knows, Canadian TV or Canadian media in general doesn't really exist. There's a lot of outsourced material from the US, especially, and because I believe Canada has a smaller population than California, and most of the population is in such a tight density, where most of them are in southern Canada and really mainly in Ontario and Quebec, it causes for a lot of empty places in Canada, and the population just really doesn't support the landmass. And due to that, the media really isn't strong, and we get a lot of our culture and inspiration and all the societal stuff is based on and inspired by the US as well. So that's why a lot of the TV and the movies that are in Canada or shown in Canada are from the US. This ties into Big Brother Canada because it was a way to produce a cheap show and a lot, or there was a requisite for Canadian networks and channels to have a certain percentage amount of Canadian shows on their program, and Big Brother Canada fit this perfectly for global since it fills up 3 days in a week at a specific time slot, either 7:30, 7, 8, 9, whatever, one of the more popular air times for an evening, and it had a consistent enough fan base, and it was essentially a filler show. Big Brother, even in the US, is a filler show that's supposed to fill a certain slot for a specific period of time. It's nothing more and nothing less in the network's eyes. The thing with Big Brother Canada is that it was always less popular in Canada than even Big Brother US is in Canada. So it wasn't a strong enough filler show. And apparently there was a change regarding Canadian networks where they don't need that certain percentage pertaining Canadian shows now, and they can outsource more US shows, so that is why the show is cancelled. I don't think it has anything to do with the live feeds, and I feel like the fans who just state that, I get why they're upset about it, and they have a right to complain about it, be sad about it, and be mad about it, and I was definitely one of them. But in general, people who tweet online about a show or talk about it on social media regarding any show, that's a very, very, very small percentage of the show. And especially with Big Brother Canada, where a lot of the people who talk about it on social media aren't even Canadians, how they feel about a show doesn't translate to actual ratings. And for Canadian shows, only the ratings from Canadians actually matter. And apparently, that fell flat over the last few years. It's from Big Brother Canada 9 onwards. So, with declining ratings and no need to have that mandate for Canadian shows anymore, it explains why the show was quote unquote put on hiatus. But I honestly think it is cancelled, and even the hype to get it to return isn't like how it was when this happened in BBCAN5 7 years ago. Now it is time to talk about my overall opinions on the season, and I feel like this is a season that I should really like. It definitely had dynamic gameplay, or at least a lot more compared to some of the more recent seasons of Canada. It really wasn't predictable, and things changed on the dime, and we had a winner who had a lot of personality. And there were definitely some interesting gameplay moments, and there was a decent amount of drama. But I feel like this season is the prime example of that arguing point or the talking point regarding the cast being the most important thing ever. And the cast in this season really isn't good. Actually, maybe that's an overreaction, but I'll state it like this. This season is a prime example as to why mixed seasons, more often than not, don't work. And it's because the newbies are less interesting on a gameplay level, a personality point of view, and on a narration point of view. And you definitely see that here. And another point is that the distribution regarding their airtime is heavily against the newbies, where the veterans, in this case Victoria and Anthony, dominates the screen time, and they were very entertaining as well, and they're dynamic in their gameplay and their personality. So I get why they had so much screen time. Only a few of the newbies, like Bailey, were able to keep up on a personality point of view, and a lot of the others were just very boring, and we didn't really get a chance to know them, so I think it harmed the season in general. This is a prime example of a season that has a lot of the great ingredients, but it's a season that you like in part and not in whole. Despite that, I don't know if it's better than last season or not, since while last season was more predictable gameplay wise, I was more invested in last season than I was this season. The first week or the first 2 weeks is very boring. I don't know if I'm going to split them up like I did with BBCAN11 last season, or I'll just talk about really the 2 weeks in one. But either way, it's really unnotable. Bailey talks about being a takes no shit person and dislikes men who seem similar to Anthony, which is very ironic with how it ended up. Elijah is a superfan and is more than a nerd. Kayla talks about her volleyball past and is very much a leader. Matthew thinks he looks like Brad Pitt for some reason and talks about being a white appearing biracial person. Donna talks about loving attention now that she has confidence, which we clearly saw in the season. Dennis is a huge superfan and wants to be a villain, and that aged so poorly. Avery talks about loving being gay, and it seemed like the intros were trying to set up Avery and Donna having some sort of conflict. Tola talks about being born in a refugee camp in Thailand, I believe. Vivek talks about being born in India and being in the military, I believe. Lexus talks about being hated on for no reason, dating Drake and having a lot of attention. Janine talks about being a content creator and being around celebrities, and they try to set up a conflict between her and Vivek as well. Todd talks about being the first person from Labrador to be on the show, and I guess it's going to be the only person. Now, the house guests talk about targeting the returnees if there are any, which age like milk. Victoria talks about trying to lay low, but she laughs at herself, knowing that she won't do that, but she wants to find a loyal alliance this time. Anthony talks about how he's going to do the same this season, which might have been the problem. But he knows that he can't align with the pretty boys as well, i.e., the other men. But he is going to work on his during management this season, which is why he lost last season, and that's another thing that aged poorly. The two vets of course agree to work together, but they need to conquer the house by working with two different sides. The first competition isn't an HOH competition, but the person who wins this can choose who will be in the two entourage groups, and they choose between the returnees first. And whichever returnee wins HOH, their entourage group will be safe. Lexus wins the first challenge, and from what I get, Victoria's entourage is Matthew, Janine, Avery, Todd, and Kayla, and Anthony's entourage is Lexus, Donna, Vivek, Bailey, Dennis, and Elijah. It seems like Vivek and Anthony are going to align with one another, which doesn't hold up very well, especially for these earlier weeks, and Avery is showing her knowledge of the game already by just her rambling. Anthony talks to Victoria about Matthew being good, and they talk about how Dennis and Janine seem like superfans that they need to look out for. So the target's already on their back with this. Janine, Bailey, and Lexus they talk to Victoria about making a girls' alliance, and Victoria mentions that she wanted to work with the girls on her season. Lie! Outright lie! As we clearly saw with her two HOHs and her overall behavior with all the women on that season. But her biggest priority is Anthony, which clearly just contradicts her prior talking points. Victoria talks to Kayla and Donna about the girls' alliance that Janine wants. Anthony talks to Victoria about Dennis and Janine being the biggest targets, but he is also concerned about Avery. All the women are in the washroom and agree to stick together, but they are not discreet whatsoever, since the guys are literally talking about it downstairs. Daniel from last season hosts the H comp, and Anthony ends up winning it, since Victoria also told him to throw it right before the competition, since a guy needs to go home, which were her words, and it rubbed him the wrong way. But this competition actually reveals how the house feels about one another, and it clearly shows that Donna and Tola were clearly rubbing people the wrong way. For some reason, Donna wants to tell Anthony about the Big Sister Alliance, and Victoria shuts it down, since two women would just go on the block. Anthony has a moment once he sees his friend's picture, who passed away soon after he got the call for being on this season. There's a spy cam in the H room, so think of Big Brother 5. So the women realize that they need to speak in groups of three because they would be watched. Anthony asks Victoria which guy and girl she doesn't trust, and she says Vivek and Janine. And she ends up telling him about the girls' alliance. Rich is dumb and then kind of states that Janine is behind it. Anthony bond about losing their loved ones, and they talk about racial stuff as well. He speaks to all of the people who are eligible for nominations. Janine gives nothing in her conversation with Anthony, which sketches him out, since he knows that she cannot be manipulated. Anthony speaks to Janine about how she is targeting him, which he denies, and they both know that it is a lie, and that she is forming a girls' alliance, and he's telling her mostly lies as a gaslighting tactic, and knowing that she will spread it around. She speaks to Victoria and tells her that Anthony told her that she's going on the block. Anthony speaks to Avery about Janine being his target because she never spoke game to him, and he asks Avery to be a pawn, and she agrees. Avery tells Bailey and Victoria that she's going up against Janine. Anthony nominates Avery and Janine for eviction. Some of the women are trying to find out who ratted out the girls' alliance. Of course, none of them realize that it was Victoria, and we start to see her sloppy gameplay with mashing Anthony to Donna, which is the start of this, and it will eventually come back to bite her in the ass. Bailey talks about how Tola doesn't speak to anyone, and he just crawled up Anthony's ass, so he feels invincible, and she thinks that Tola told about the girls' alliance, and Janine didn't deny it. Bailey is saying all this to Vivek, and I don't know why she would think Tola would tell about the girls' alliance, since he doesn't even know about the alliance. Anyways, the entire house wants Tola out so he could backdoor, or so he could be a backdoor option. The black slashed mixed with black girls, I don't really know at this point because they all look kind of ambiguous and I didn't really watch the digital dailies enough, though I'm pretty sure about Lexus being mixed because I saw commentary about it. Anyways, that's besides the point. People with black ancestry talk about how they're going to stick together and how the Hot Chocolate Alliance, which is the alliance name, is more important to them than the Girls Alliance since they are fighting for the bigger picture. So this is essentially the cookout, but without the first black winner stuff, since we got that with Tashawn. Dennis wins the veto and Janine is pissed since she was so close to winning it. Vivek realizes that Anthony is lying about Janine and tells her to not give up. Anthony speaks to Dennis just so the veto isn't used. Of course, there's a bunch of talk to and with the veto holder, and Dennis doesn't use the veto. Janine knows that she is a gunner, and Avery knows that she is safe, since the girls and Hot Chocolate have her back. We have the start of the Alexis and Matthew showmance that thankfully didn't get much screen time. Victoria is trashing Lexus to the other girls since she knows that the girls are not getting to the 7 with them, and causing chaos is good, and is an unnecessarily stupid move, and it will eventually cause Lexus to not trust her later on in the season. This leads to Donna stating that Lexus hangs out with the guys all day, and Victoria repeats this to Lexus, but acts like she wasn't saying anything. The Hot Chocolate Alliance talk about never being seen in the same room as one another, and Kayla is trying to stop the Lexus bashing happening in the house, since it isn't good for their alliance. I'm glad someone is thinking smartly about this. Anthony seemingly feels bad about sending home Janine since she's such a nice person, though felt nothing about slaughtering most of the season 7 cast. Janine somewhat feels like Vivek was the person who sold her out about her asking him if the original 12 are still together, and I don't think this is accurate at all, but most of the house is suspicious about Vivek anyways, when he was one of the few people who wanted her to stick around. Victoria tells Janine that she told Anthony about the Girls' Alliance. Why in the hell did she tell Janine that she was the one who told Anthony about it? And Janine didn't do anything with this, but she knew that she was a gunner anyways. Janine is evicted in a unanimous 11-0 vote. I really don't have much to say about Janine. She didn't really make many mistakes that would cause her to be on the block, and I do think that the dynamics with the mixed cast caused her to be a target, since because she is older and because she's a fan, they correctly assumed that she wouldn't be easy to manipulate, and that's kind of just why she was targeted. At the same time, whenever she got information to her advantage, she didn't really use it well, and I don't know how she would perform on other seasons. So she might just be a pre-drawer on most seasons, but in general, I don't think she's one of the worst first boots. I do think that week 2 is a much better week than the first week. or the first 2 weeks, technically, since we have a lot of confrontations, we generally had a lot of shocking and also stupid gameplay, and it really was a whirlwind to watch. The HOH reveals who is at the bottom of the house, or the competition does, and that is Vivek, and encourages the majority to stay in the majority. So Victoria wins HOH, despite claiming that she didn't want to. The guys are at the bottom, and the white women are targeted next. And it's not shocking that a competition like this would benefit a returning player. Vivek is wondering why everyone targeted him and tells Anthony that there was an alliance made between himself, Bailey, Donna, and Todd about the East Coast Alliance, where they never really got into the same room, but a few of them told one another that they will protect one another. Of course, Anthony repeats all of this to Victoria, who wants an easy target to boot, and they both agree that Vivek needs to go. Victoria speaks to Donna, and the latter mentions that no one takes Vivek seriously and that there are bigger threats in the house. But Victoria is trying to use this to get Donna to be able to come clean, but of course she doesn't take it. Victoria speaks to Vivek, who admits about the alliance with Anthony, but not the East Coast Alliance, and he clearly didn't connect that the two returning players were working together, though this happens in every season, especially in the beginning, and that she was baiting him. Bailey speaks with Kayla and Avery about how Tola should go instead of Vivek, and this rubs Kayla the wrong way, since Bailey is clearly protecting Vivek. Kayla and Victoria talk about how the two women, i.e., Bailey and Donna, want Tola to go. Victoria speaks to Vivek about the East Coast Alliance, which he mentions is false, and he feels like Todd and Bailey threw him under the bus. She reports this to Bailey and Donna and discusses a huge fight between Vivek and Bailey. And it's really frustrating that no one came to the conclusion that Victoria was stirring things, despite her clearly getting some information wrong herself. Bailey snaps that she hasn't spoken to Vivek since day one, though she was protecting him, which honestly is kind of contradictory. She tells him, no, he tells her to relax. This makes her snap even more, and they're both yelling at the top of their young lungs, and it's just hilarious. We learn about the side alliance called the Directors, which includes the 5 members of the Hot Chocolate Alliance, plus Matthew and Elijah. And Victoria essentially gets Elijah to go on the block as a pawn. Victoria nominates Vivek and Elijah for eviction, with Vivek being the target. Dennis talks about his friendship with Vivek and mentions that he will throw the veto, so Vivek will have to take himself off and to create some distance between the two of them. Todd and Donna are talking about how Vivek threw them under the bus and it wasn't even a serious alliance. Victoria is watching Donna talk with Todd through the spy cam and it causes her to be very paranoid, and she now wants Donna out on the random. We have a boring Matthew and Lexus romance segment, and it's crazy since they also ignored Donna and Todd's romance, especially with her leaving this week. Donna gives Vivek a handshake in front of Avery, who reports it to Lexus and Victoria. And honestly, all of this was such a misunderstanding, to be honest, but it just shows how irrational of a player Victoria is and is not a reliable ally. Victoria tells Vivek that there's a backdoor target and that they will take him off the block. Dimitri hosts the veto competition and Dennis wins his second consecutive veto, but Victoria isn't sure that veto will be used or that if Dennis will use it. Todd and Donna don't know about who will be the replacement, since Vivek told Todd that he is sure that he's getting off the block, and Victoria speaks to Dennis to ensure that the veto is getting used. Donna talks to Victoria about Anthony and his game, trying to get him as a replacement nominee. And this was really dumb of Donna to do, since the vets always work together in the beginning, so she set herself up with this. Victoria is claiming to feel bad, but I don't believe her. And I don't know why she didn't consider taking out Todd. It would force Donna and Bailey to be closer to herself and the woman while still weakening that side, and Vivek would still be a big shield, but they never consider this. Anyways, Dennis takes Vivek off the block, and Donna is named the replacement nominee. Donna is obviously pissed off about being blindsided, since she was really supportive of the woman, and Victoria is emotional about the move. But Anthony is giving her a pep talk that Donna and Bailey would have sent them home next, and Bailey is going home next week. And of course, this doesn't age well, especially with his role in her not going home. Dennis and Vivek are shocked that Donna is up, since she claimed that Victoria was close to her. The girls have a powwow, and Avery gaslights Bailey about her and Donna alienating her, i.e., Avery, and Lexus mentions that they threw her under the bus. And honestly, it's just very annoying, and Avery tends to do this gaslighting a lot throughout the season. Victoria joins in and adds more gaslighting, and the two women end up apologizing for a bunch of things that don't even seem accurate. We see a random Anthony and Bailey fight, though they fought a lot from the few digital dailies that I watched at this point in the season, where they're both so condescending towards one another, where she tells him that he talks at and over her, and he calls her and Donna out for trying to send him home, and he calls her a chatty Cassie, and she calls him out for being annoying. Avery outright tells Donna that she can't keep her in the house as a fan, and she does some last minute campaigning. Well, if you went this far into making such a stupid move, you can't really turn back on it now, so I guess that makes sense. The women have another clear the air moment, since the hot chocolate women don't want to be run by Anthony and Matthew, but it's clearly a smokescreen. Donna is evicted in a 7-3 vote, and we see a random kiss of her and Todd. Clearly, production must have thought their showmance was way too boring to air, even compared to Matthew and Lexus. As a player, I don't really know how I feel about Donna. Just from the first H competition, it's clear that she didn't have the best perception amongst a lot of the house guests, though it seemed like she kind of recovered from it, and she definitely made a few errors, like doing those handshakes with Vivek and being openly talking to Todd, and then pitching Anthony as a replacement nominee. But I do feel like a lot of the reason why she was sent home was due to stupid, I wouldn't say jealousy, but just overt paranoia from Victoria and the other women, who are just very entitled in their way of playing the game and how they can do whatever they want, but no one else can do the same thing. So, in a way, I do feel like she was kind of screwed over. As a player, or as a personality, she definitely did have a personality, and it seemed like she was getting used to being on camera and giving interesting commentary. So, I do feel like she would have been one of the bigger personalities had she stayed longer, but just from the 2 or I guess 3 weeks that we saw her, she was okay. She wasn't a dud, but she wasn't the hugest personality ever. The third week, or some might consider the fourth week, is definitely an emotional week that definitely leaves an impression on you, and it does it in a positive way. So it's definitely a week that's filled with great TV. Vivek wins HOH, and there was a reporter cameo in the competition, and a bunch of people are worried about who he will nominate, since he's like the biggest wild card in the house. It seems like he wants to target Bailey, and Todd is ranting to the house about not caring that he can be nommed. Bailey's also ranting, where the other women have to calm them down, and it's just pathetic on their parts that they're acting like this and they're so entitled. But their entitlement is allowed to fester throughout the season. Bailey decides to finally speak to Vivek, and the conversation does not go well, especially since she tells him that he would have been on the block again by the house had he not won HOH. You're really not endearing yourself to him at all at this point. The women realize that they need to keep Bailey close since she's a shield for them, since a lot of people want to target her. Vivek asks Elijah to be a pawn for him, and he agrees. Dennis speaks to Vivek about his plans and if he is in a boys' alliance, which Vivek denies. Dennis suggests to nominate Tola instead of Goose and tells Vivek about Anthony's game, which is all about keeping shields and manipulating people, which Dennis is very correct on. Vivek nominates Elijah and Bailey for eviction. Dennis wants Bailey to stay and is hoping to work Vivek into targeting Anthony. Very bold, but faulty. Before the veto competition, the Hot Chocolate Girls talk about how the guys in the Directors Alliance wants to pull Goose off, and they, i.e. the women, wants to pull Bailey off the block, despite her not being in the bigger alliance. They're being selfish with this, and it's one of the many signs for them, and it will eventually cause their downfall, since they don't consider the people that they're supposed to be working with, and they clearly are very transparent about only caring about themselves. Karen makes an appearance in the veto competition, but Kayla ends up winning the veto, and she's obviously going to take off Bailey with the veto, but appeasing her ally Goose, who does not know that she's aligned with Bailey. Vivek speaks to Dennis, and he tells him that Anthony is not the move that needs to be made, and Dennis mentions that he should put up taller then, but Dennis doesn't like this idea. And Dennis isn't handling this well, and it's coming off as badgering, which is just rubbing Vivek, someone who clearly wants to be in the in-group, the wrong way. Dennis tells Vivek that weakening Anthony by booting Tola is a good move, and putting a girl up ruins their future plan. Anthony is on to Dennis and what he's trying to do. And Anthony speaks to his alliance about getting Dennis out, as he feels like he can pull Vivek into the group, or at least temporarily. Anthony tells them that if they do not push for Dennis, either Todd or another girl will go up. Kayla and Victoria speak to Vivek about the move that he needs to make. Dennis and Anthony comes in to echo those thoughts. Kayla vetoes Bailey, and Vivek names Dennis as the replacement nominee. I hate a biatch who knows that he isn't the most liked, knows that the people who are quote unquote the popular people don't like him, and instead of running up with the few people who are there with you and creating your own path, you dump them to hide in with the majority or the proletariat or the society that doesn't like you anyways, only for them to toss you out. It kind of just reminds me of all of those kids in high school where they're in a group but they're not in the popular group, and one person gets a little bit of attention from the popular kid, so he dumps his good friend to the side to join up with those popular guys, and it never works out well. Vivek wants to have a conversation with Dennis, and he tells Dennis that the entire house threw him under the bus. Dennis rants about how he literally saved Vivek from going home last week, which is true, and regrets pulling him off the block. How Vivek will be next, which he rejects as this aged poorly, even though it was a result of a twist. Anthony enters the room, and Dennis doesn't want to deal with him, since everyone was supposedly agreed upon that, or it was supposedly agreed upon that Anthony was to leave. So Anthony told him that it wasn't everyone. Vivek told him that it was the best logical move, so Dennis tells him that betraying his closest ally this early on in the season is not a good look to the house, and he won't be trusted. And he even mentions how Victoria regrets nominating Donna. Vivek speaks to Todd, who doesn't give him much at all, which, shocker, there, and then speaks to Kayla, who tells him that her intention was to take Bailey off the block, and she is lying that she didn't know. Obviously, though he mentions that she had the votes to stay against Elijah. Tola talks about being born in a refugee camp in Cambodia. Wait, okay, I thought his intro said he was born in Thailand, but now he's saying Cambodia. Anyways, his mom had to hide her kids, cross the river, and they seek refuge in Thailand before moving or migrating to Canada. And I really love having moments like this on the show. And it's really showing that diversity and letting them explain their own stories, livelihoods, and heritage. Dennis does some campaigning, and we see a lot of the girls talking, but it's all for nothing. Dennis is evicted in a unanimous 9-0 vote. Dennis is definitely one of the bigger personalities in the house, and he was so unapologetically himself. And it's really something that I respect not only as a player, but as a person, since so many people just refuse to be unapologetically himself. I think he was the oldest person in the house, but he had such a youthful energy to him, and you could tell that he wasn't trying hard to be younger. While he definitely had some great game instincts when it comes to the veterans and the strategic moves that needed to be made, his social game definitely wasn't the best. He had a target on him from day one due to the veteran dynamic, and the fact that he won those two veto competitions for little to no reason just built an unnecessary target on him. Saw him going home early while frustrating definitely wasn't shocking at all. And I do think the season would have been more interesting had he lasted a bit longer. But even had this not happened this week, I don't think he would have been too long for the season overall. So we're getting to the midpoint of the season, or at least by the amount of days that the season takes place in. As week 4, or I should say week 5, it's an okay-ish week. It's not one that leaves too much of an impression now that I'm thinking about it. And it doesn't help that the twist kind of makes a lot of it null and void. Elijah wins HOH, and no one knows what the hell he is going to do. Elijah is thinking about throwing up Matthew and Lexus, but it's too big of a move too soon, so he's thinking about one of Bailey, Tola, Vivek, or Todd to go. Kayla and Avery feel good about this since they're one of the few who are consistently nice to Elijah. We have some boring Matthew and Lexus stuff, and Victoria is cranky due to being a have-not, where this is all a build-up of Victoria getting mad at Lexus and Matthew showing their affection towards one another in public, where we see the woman eventually ranting about it, and it just clearly shows how much they really don't like or care about Lexus or her feelings. Bailey makes her pitch to Elijah about keeping herself safe, and she makes her pitch, but it doesn't go anywhere. Tola tells Elijah that Bailey and Kayla were talking about keeping Dennis over him last week, and this shocks Elijah, especially regarding Kayla. So, from this, it shows that he and Kayla were close, but she obviously prioritized other allies, and we never actually see him and Kayla's relationship on the actual episodes. Though we will see when he's evicted, he told her something that he didn't tell many other people. Elijah does speak to Kayla during their McDonald's twist, and she denies it, since she was the one pitching for Dennis to go up, which is true. So Kayla wants Tall gone now! Kayla rants about this to Anthony, and we see some of her extreme paranoia, which would eventually be her downfall. And Anthony is just BSing her, since he doesn't care about sending Tola home anytime soon, since he is a number for him. Elijah tells Tola that he's going to be a pawn, and Bailey will be the backdoor target. Elijah tells Todd that he's also going to be on the block as a pawn, and we do see Elijah nominates Tola and Todd for eviction. Matthew is told by Elijah that Bailey has been pushing him as a nominee, and Anthony is told this by Matthew, and they plan to plot to get Bailey on the block, which Lexus also agrees with. Kayla walks in the room and notices that they become silent when she enters, and she knows that clearly it shows some distrust there. So she rants about it to Elijah, and there's more talk about the showmans. Kayla rants about this to the Alliance and wants Anthony to control his pets, i.e., Tola and Matthew, and this really just makes her more of a shield and a target for everyone else in the house. Kayla does not feel supported since she helped send out the first three people, especially Donna and Dennis, for him, and he isn't returning that same support, especially since those two people weren't, none of the three were going after her. Lexus wins the veto, and she speaks to Elijah about what he would want to happen with the veto, where he would prefer for Todd to be vetoed, but Lexus does not have a relationship with Todd and will prefer to take off Tola with the veto. But Elijah thinks that Bailey versus Tola would be more interesting regarding the information that would be spread out as they campaign against one another. Elijah speaks to Matthew about how Kayla did not save him last week with the veto and mentions that he, i.e., Matthew, Lexus, and Anthony, are more trustworthy than the other women. Elijah ends up throwing Matthew under the bus to the women. Why in the hell would he do this? But it just shows how out of tune and out of touch Elijah is the entire season. And then the woman complained about the trio trying to save Matthew. Kayla continues her rants, and Victoria continues stirring her pot, which she encourages Lexus to not use the veto, since she and Matt will be on the block next week, and she will lose the woman. Of course, this causes Lexus to not use the veto, and this is just one of the many examples of Lexus not really having much agency of her own in the game. So, Lexus speaks to Elijah, who is annoyed that the veto was not used, as his backdoor Bailey plot failed. And he mentioned that there was some sort of misunderstanding, though he is ranting about his allies protecting Bailey so much, which is definitely true, where she was under the impression that he would have nominated Matt. So clearly, some misinformation was being spread. Anyways, Elijah tells Matthew about how they are pitted against one another, and all this goes back to the woman, though he shoos Victoria off when she tries to speak to him, and he has no poker face, so she is rubbed the wrong way. And she knows that he doesn't trust her. Lexus should have held this information to herself, but is causing all of this mess as she ends up telling the woman about this. The woman has to tell Todd to campaign, which is just so pathetic on his part, and it just shows how much of a dud he is, not only as a personality, but as a player. But people overlook it because of his accent. We see 2 days before the eviction that Anthony is arguing with Victoria and Kayla about who should stay, where he mentions that he is not sending Tola home, and they don't want to send Todd home, since they sent home three people who weren't going after them. Anthony is annoyed, since they said 3 days ago that Tola is staying. From what the others have mentioned on the digital dailies and some other content afterwards, it did seem like Todd was being lined up to be evicted before the twist happened. Speaking about that twist, the secret veto, or the boxed veto, is missing and is leading to the chain of rejection, where it starts with Elijah and he has to state the person he doesn't want to have it, and then that person does the same thing until one person is left. Elijah chooses Tola, who chooses Bailey, who chooses Vivek, who chooses Todd, who chooses Lexus, who chooses Matthew, who chooses Kayla, who chooses Anthony, and who chooses Avery, meaning that Victoria has the veto. And this should have said something to the house guests about the hierarchy in the dynamics of the house. Victoria can take someone off the block, and that person will be end up. Sorry, no. Victoria can take someone off the block, and the person that's saved will choose the replacement nominee, though she also has the option to not use it, though she never considers that for some reason. Tola pushes for Bailey to be nominated. Todd mentions that he would choose Lexus or Matt. Anthony and Victoria talk to people to make sure that Vivek will be nominated no matter who she chooses, though Bailey freaks out since she knows that Tola will pick her as a nominee since he chose her first in the chain of rejection. For some reason, she chooses to take Todd off the block, though it made more sense for her to not use it, but Victoria clearly doesn't think things through like that, and he chooses Vivek as the replacement nominee. Vivek is begging and pleading to be saved, and they're all pretty much just shutting him down to his face. Vivek is evicted in a unanimous 8-0 vote, and they have to reveal their vote to him to his face. Vivek is someone who definitely made a mark on the season as he had a very interesting personality and his gameplay was so chaotic, though he is someone who definitely has a lot of mouth regarding what he thinks should be done, the type of strategies that should be implemented, but when it comes time to do it, he never actually does it, and he definitely caused a bit of drama during his short time in the house. Though it was weird that he was invisible during his final week, despite him going home due to the twist. And it does suck that he was twist screwed, where it kind of makes it seem like his karma was inorganic from how he handled his HOH, since he would have been safe under normal circumstances. But at the same time, the veto didn't have to be used, and they chose to use the veto. Anyways, Vivek just reminds me of those people who wants to be in with the cool kids so badly to the point where he'll sacrifice all of his principles, all of his morals, all of his strategy, all of his interests and stuff to do that, and it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Though he did get a downfall, so he's at least unique and has a presence, which I can't say for a lot of the newbies on the season. So yeah. So now we are at week 5 or week 6 to some people, and this week was meh. I don't really have much thoughts on it, even compared to the last week. Anyways, Anthony is annoyed at the result of the eviction since Victoria showed that she cannot be trusted yet again. He is even more annoyed because even though they sacrificed people, there are still one of him and 4 other women. So clearly there are always going to be an advantage compared to him. Elijah is trying to go back under the radar since his HOH didn't really do what he wanted it to do, and he lost the trust of most of the people in the Directors Alliance. Avery wins HOH and is thinking about putting up Todd and Elijah, but she doesn't want to use a lame move, or to make a lame move, though she ends up doing that anyways. But she and Victoria wants to put someone from his side up, so they are thinking about Matthew. There's more talk about how Anthony does not scare her and they don't care about his feelings, which they make very apparent. Kayla and Victoria talk about how the other side will get Todd off if he's on the block and how Matthew needs to go home, so him and Tola need to be nominated. Avery enters the room and they tell her that a bigger move needs to be made. Victoria kind of makes the final 3 with Todd and Bailey, so she is now getting close to Todd and throwing Kayla under the bus. And I don't get this, but I guess this is just another example of Victoria just being very messy and kind of anti-woman at a lot of times, or has that undertone to her. And I don't really know why they gave Todd so many chances throughout the season when he didn't show or prove them anything. Anyways, let's just move on from that. Avery decides to speak to Lexus about Anthony's precarious position, and Lexus is waiting to decide who to side with down the road. And honestly, this is to me just seems like she's just very passive and doesn't really care about making any move. But I guess her just observing did work out for her since the people that weren't trustworthy showed their asses. Eventually. Avery, Kayla, and Victoria have a last minute talk that Mac isn't the move to make this week, and the target needs to be Elijah, with Tola being the pawn. Victoria still plans on going to the final 2 with Anthony, so she speaks to him to someone to make him comfortable. Avery tells Elijah that he is going up, but he still thinks that he is a pawn. Avery nominates Tola and Elijah for eviction. The women talk about how Anthony needs to touch the block once, which literally never happens, even at the end. I guess you can count the final 4, but that was due to the nominee winning the veto and there being no one else, so it kind of doesn't really count. Victoria knows that she's playing chaotically, but it's a smoke screen to hide her final 2 with Anthony, where they have a chat about their final 2. But she doesn't realize that you need to be careful when you are putting up smoke screens, because a lot of people see those smoke screens as real, and it gets back to the person that you are attempting to protect, which we eventually see happen. Victoria talks with Bailey about how they need to get Matt on the block and Todd off the block, and Avery tells Kayla and Victoria that she wants to nominate Anthony as a pawn post Vila, but they tell her that he will never forgive her for that, despite him nominating her in the first week. Bailey enters the room and they all talk about how Elijah is a weak move, and Avery is thinking about sending home Tola, but Victoria and Kayla are talking about sending Matt home, which Avery doesn't like since they have a good gaming relationship. 1. Avery never sticks with her contritions, which is her biggest flaw in the game. And 2. Why have we never seen this friendship on the screen? I know the producers thought Matt was boring, but you have to show the relationships in order for us to care about certain moves like these. But they never do so. And for all the talk that Avery makes about being a good player, a super fan, and someone who wants to make big moves, she's very easy to push over. Tola wins the veto, and this is the worst case scenario for Avery. Kayla and Victoria are already plotting, and Avery is talking to herself about the options before they speak to her. Anthony and Lexus joins the group, and they have to be convinced by the three women that Matt's instant issue. And then Bailey, who isn't even in their alliance, joins the conversation, though Kayla tells them that she is worried about Matt, and they better manage Matt if he stays. Victoria starts bashing Kayla to the other women for flip-flopping, and then she lashes out at Kayla, who rejoins them. And then Bailey joins in on them lashing out at Kayla, who said that Avery doesn't want to put Matt up. Avery pretty much tells Matt that he's going up while crying, and he speaks to Anthony about it, who is really annoyed. Victoria continues her pestering to Avery, and Anthony is trying to coach Matt, but ultimately nothing comes of it, as Matt still goes on the block. The women are hoping that this move doesn't piss off Lexus too much, where Kayla and Avery are still coming up with excuses as to why they are protecting Tola. Anthony tells Matt to campaign to the group so he could stay. Bailey enters the conversation with the other woman, seeing that if Lexus isn't supportive of the move, it means that she isn't a part of their group. And they now have to know that the two, i.e., Lexus and Anthony, are working to keep Matt. Bailey has this really entitled attitude and demeanor about her where she just feels like she can call people out and make demands. So she herself doesn't really prove a whole lot. But I guess it worked out for her. Though I feel like if she had a different demographic or fit different demographics pertaining sex, race, age, whatever, this wouldn't have flown at all. But I also think that if she was on an all newbie cast, I don't think this would have flown well either. But that's all besides the point. Alejandra and Olivia make a cameo, and they waste a bunch of time on it, though it was nice to see the two of them. Anthony and Victoria continue to argue, where Anthony mentions that he is protecting her from going on the block, where she is entertaining conversations about him, where she mentions that he was supposed to be on the block again. And this would be the start of her downfall, and kind of the start of Anthony's growing resentment towards her. Anthony is annoyed with her being a flip-flopper, and she's clearly doing whatever she wants based on her last conversation. Though she could vote to keep Matt, and he would stay if that's what she wanted to do. Anthony and Lexus are starting to get over the hot chocolate alliance, essentially. Lexus is campaigning to the girls about bringing Elijah, who is the last person in the middle group, but they aren't listening to anything she is saying. Matthew is evicted in a 4-3 vote. I really don't have much to say about Matthew. From the little that he was shown on the show, he was very boring personality wise and didn't really offer much of anything to the game, outside of just following Anthony. On a lot of the other seasons, I do think that he would have done better, since he really is just unthreatening and he's very loyal, but in a cast that is so crazy as this one, he really just didn't stand out much as a player, and his showmance with Lexus was very boring, and I think he's one of the most under-edited people on Big Brother Canada. I have to do more data and research into that, but in general, there's really not much to say about him here, and he's one of the few people, especially the newbies on the season, that were just very boring and didn't offer much. Overall, he's a very nice guy and would probably be cool to hang out with in real life, but when it comes to being a Big Brother player or a Big Brother house guest, he just didn't offer anything. Week 6, or Week 7 as some might call it, was definitely an interesting week with a brutal betrayal and a blindside, which was an impressive move, but definitely an emotional one too. Though it starts off very weirdly with that stupid twist that ultimately had a disappointing result. But overall, it's arguably one of the more memorable weeks of the season, so I do give it props. Of course, Anthony and Lexus are not pleased about Matt going home, but we do see Tola and Todd talk about how the girls, especially Kayla, are playing both sides, and they want to target her specifically. And her antics over the last 2 weeks definitely contribute to this. It is announced that someone will be gone a day later. So it's kind of like a double in the way that BB5, BB6, and BB7 did it, as well as the instant evictions of the early BBCAN seasons. But obviously, this isn't an instant eviction. They compete for safety, and whoever wins gets to have the most control, or as close to it as they can get, during this twist, which Bailey ends up winning. She gives HOH to Victoria. Tola, who was second, So the better you perform, the more options you have. Nominates Kayla for eviction. Todd nominates Avery for eviction. Lexus makes Tola a POV player. Victoria gives Anthony a slot pass. Avery picks Todd as a POV player. And Elijah makes Lexus a POV player. Kayla ends up winning the veto, saving her ass, or at least for another few days. Victoria, Avery, and Kayla quickly realize that Tola and Todd nominated them, but Victoria doesn't want to put either one of them up. I have no idea why. So they are trying to push Elijah. Victoria tells Elijah that he is a pawn, and the two men decide to come clean, which causes a fight with a lot of the house. Victoria nominates Elijah after Kayla takes herself off the block, and despite campaigning to Lexus, who promised Matt she would get revenge for him, it's clear that Elijah is cooked. Elijah is evicted in a unanimous 6-0 vote. Elijah definitely had a weird disposition to him regarding his personality and how he handled the game. He was very passive as he let himself be pawned by his alliance quite a few times. They showed him that he was expendable at many different occasions, but he didn't really try to improve his relationships with people that weren't in his alliance or were in his alliance, and then he threw Matt under the bus for little to no reason. So him going here in this twist, and you tend to notice in BBCAN especially, where a lot of the expendable players tend to go home during twists like these, and he kind of fits that. As a personality, he really didn't offer much. I wouldn't say that he's a complete bore like some of the other men, but he wasn't interesting at all either. And he's definitely someone who I think is going to be forgettable once you distance yourself from the season. But he was kind of just meh at best in all areas. Kayla is told right as Elijah leaves that anyone who is beside Victoria at the end will lose. Avery wins HOH, and Todd is ranting to Lexus that Kayla or Avery is going to win the season. Avery wants to put up Todd, but Bailey isn't liking that idea, but she nominates Todd and Tola for eviction anyways. Kayla is talking to Lexus about how Bailey has walked into a hot chocolate meeting last week, and now she thinks that Bailey knows about them, so they should backdoor her, which Lexus actually agrees with. But the other women are way too attached to Bailey. Todd repeats his conversation with Lexus to Bailey, and they can use it to get Avery to nominate Lexus. And Bailey tells Victoria this about voting Avery out. Or maybe it was Lexus. Honestly, I don't even remember at this point. Victoria, who is already annoyed with Lexus, rants about this and repeats this to Avery. Anthony enters the room and they talk about the plan to send Lexus home, where Victoria is also threatened by Kayla winning all of the competitions. Anthony is not letting Lexus go this week since she's the only woman in the group that he can actually trust. So he repeats to Victoria what Kayla told him about what Elijah told her, i.e., Kayla, about Victoria being the biggest threat in the house as he left. She's annoyed because she asked Kayla, who refused to tell her what Elijah told her, but she told several other people in the house. And Anthony accurately talks about how Victoria is very impulsive and emotional, and it's easy to use that against her so he can get whatever he wants. Bailey wins the veto, and of course, she's going to save Todd. Victoria tells Avery about how Kayla needs to go, and everyone wants her out since she plays both sides. Anthony tells Lexus that they weren't trying to backdoor Bailey, but she was trying to backdoor her. And Anthony is aware that he's trying to tell a bunch of lies, and the only thing that's true is the Elisha stuff about Kayla, essentially. We just see a bunch of scenes of everyone talking about Kayla and all the things she supposedly set up, even though Bailey didn't believe Kayla or the Kayla stuff at first. Anthony literally had to coach Tola about what to say, since he tells Avery right before the ceremony initially that he doesn't have anything against Kayla and he isn't going to make up a lie, only for him to leave, speak to Anthony, and then conveniently mentions that Kayla mentioned something about the people who have HOHs, i.e., Avery and Victoria. And the fact that Avery fell for this is so dumb, and she should have read how transparent and how bullshit this was. Bailey, of course, takes Todd off the block, and Avery names Kayla as the replacement nominee. And the latter is very shocked. Avery tells Kayla that Lexus and Anthony told her that she wants her out, and Kayla calls a house meeting since she never said what she's being accused of. Kayla tells Avery that the people that said she has a motive, or the people who said everything that they're accusing her of have a motive, and she never said that she wants Victoria on the block. Though Victoria, Anthony, and Bailey, who wasn't even effing involved in this, which is an annoying quality of Bailey's, in my opinion, railroads Kayla, and it's clear that Kayla isn't good at arguing. Kayla ends up apologizing to Avery and Victoria and mentions that they will see that Anthony is lying when they watch this back, and they get that confirmation in a few weeks in the jury house. So she was right about that. Kayla is evicted in a unanimous 5-0 vote. I will definitely say that Kayla is one of the newbies that has a bigger personality, though I wouldn't really say that she's an interesting reality star or a very unique one as well. And I feel like we really didn't get to know much about her as a person in the season, especially since she was always grouped in with Avery and Victoria took a lot of the screen time. And it's not like she had H's where she could develop herself in that way as well. In general, she did bring a lot of paranoia and crazy gameplay in the season, and I do appreciate how she just didn't give a crap about anything and how active she was in the game, even though it all kind of came back to bite her in the butt with how quickly she was to turn on people and to lie on everyone and to be selfish, only for that to be done back to her. So I guess Kayla is one of the better newbies of the season on a personality and a gameplay point of view, even though she wouldn't be that strong if she was on other seasons. But I have no issues with Kayla. Week 7, or week 8 as some would state, was a very boring week, and at this point I was just ready for the season to be over, and I really wasn't interested, especially with how the results of the week turned out, despite it being for the best. There's a lot of mixed feelings about Kayla being evicted, and Lexus still feels like she can't trust the women, since they are very flip-floppy, while Anthony and Tola have never done her wrong. We get a hint that Bailey now trusts Anthony, though we are never shown this in the episodes at all, which sucks since this becomes very important during the endgame. Tola ends up winning 8-8 and makes it clear right after the competition that he is targeting Avery, since she nominated him twice and she is good at competitions. Victoria and Bailey are worried about what Tola is going to do, since there was a deal made with Todd. The two guys talk about sending home Avery, and Tola tells Todd that he might have to nominate him as a pawn. Anthony and Lexus talk about how a backdoor could happen and either Victoria or Avery, or sorry, the pair of Victoria and Avery needs to be split up, or Todd and Bailey being the other pair that needs to be split up. Though there's a lot of talk about sending Victoria home, which is very foreshadowing for what Anthony will eventually do to her. Anthony starts planting seeds about Victoria to Tola, knowing that he doesn't plan on sending her home this week, but knows that to get a player like her, seeds need to be planted earlier, and he executes this brilliantly, as we all know. Kevin makes an appearance to have a strategy talk with Kevin from BBCAN12, and the latter tells Bailey that she is going up on the block as a pawn. Anthony tells the diary room that he can rely on Bailey over Avery, though they never show us this, and it makes it even more frustrating that there are no feeds in this season, since we would have actually seen this. And then it mentions that the Hot Chocolate Alliance was only good when convenient for the woman, which is very true and accurate, so he's fine turning on Avery now. Tona tells Avery that he's nominating her against Bailey, and she tries to throw Todd under the bus, since the girls now want him gone, after protecting him for no reason all season. Tola nominates Avery and Bailey for eviction. Bailey is really pissed off after the nominations due to Tola's speech, and she went about it to the entire house quite a few times and gives him a few lashings as well, though he thought that it was just a joke. He apologizes and she is confused since she was told that she is a pawn and he was harsher with her than the actual target, i.e. Avery. Anthony assures Bailey that she is safe, and we finally see how close they are. The Bailey calls out his game regarding planting seeds against the others to make him everyone's number one, and Victoria mentions that she wants Todd to go this week, since her ideal final four is herself, Anthony, Bailey, and Avery, which is definitely in her best interest. Bailey tells Todd to not use the veto if he wins it, since she does not want to lose him or Victoria, and she feels safe against Avery. And Anthony talks to Alexis about not wanting to lose Tola, and how the woman wanted her gone last week, before he flipped things around on Kayla. Victoria joins them and conveniently now mentions about how Todd is paranoid and needs to go, which Lexus also finds to be very convenient, since Victoria and the other girls were defending Todd the entire game, until there were the two women are thrown under the bus and have the spotlight on them by being nominated. Victoria lies about Todd, thinking that he is a target for Anthony, and Anthony sees right through Victoria and knows that she is lying. And she's only doing this so she won't be a replacement nominee, hoping that Anthony would tell Tola and convince him to nominate Todd. And he ends up reporting this exact thing to Tola about Victoria's transparency. Victoria throws the veto since she does not want to show her cards, and Anthony stopped throwing comps at this point. Todd wins the veto, and Bailey is mixed about wanting to be taken off the block, and Tola obviously does not want Todd to use the veto. Todd decides to not use the veto. Both nominees think that they are safe, and I don't know why Avery is thinking this, and Victoria is not telling Avery the truth about being the target. We do see some campaigning, especially from Avery, and Bailey is a bit sus about Anthony in general, though Avery is told by Anthony that she's pretty much going home since he can't show his cards. Avery is evicted in a 3-1 vote. Avery is a nice woman, or at least from what I saw on the show, but she definitely annoyed me, especially with how she gaslit a lot of people to kind of get out of situations that she was in, and she seemed like she lacked self awareness. And despite being a huge fan, she never actually made the best moves for her game, and she was so easily manipulated by her allies to make the moves that were against her best interest. Like sending home Kayla and Matt did absolutely nothing for her HOH outside of weakening her credibility in the house and making her seem like such a larger target. And it also makes her come off as a lot more untrustworthy. Entertainment wise, there really wasn't anything there, and it was easy to predict how she would be in the game in the preseason, so I guess she lived up to that. But she's kind of just okay at best, and slightly annoying at worst. It is the double eviction, and Bailey is annoyed that Victoria gave Avery a sympathy vote, though I don't know why Bailey is shocked that Victoria did this since Vic was always closer to Avery than Bailey. Anyways, a bunch of alumni returned for the H comp. So Cindy, BBCAN9, Ty, Summer, Tara, Hope, Renee, and I think that is it, though I could be missing some people. Victoria wins HOH, though she was literally trying to throw the HOH, and nominates Tola and Lexus for eviction. And Lexus is annoyed because Victoria told her hours ago that she wouldn't nominate her, and Victoria is clearly protecting Todd despite bashing him all week. Todd wins the veto and doesn't use it, and Anthony is actually crying throughout the double. Tola is evicted in a unanimous 3-0 vote. Tola is yet another newbie, especially a newbie man who really didn't offer much of anything in the season. As a player, he was doing pretty poorly in the beginning and was rubbing people the wrong way. And when it came to the game, it seemed like he saw things in a one-dimensional way, and he kind of just stuck by with Anthony all season, and he didn't really flex his wings much at all. When it comes to him being a personality, he really didn't offer much of anything in that category either, as I didn't find him entertaining, notable, or memorable regarding anything that he did that didn't involve gameplay and it was just about his personality or entertainment value. I did like his background and seeing a darker skinned Asian person and a Southeast Asian was very cool since we don't really get them much on BB or even BBUS. So week 8, or week 9 as other people would call it, is definitely an interesting week, especially since it's the penultimate week, and this is usually where the game slows down. But for a final 5 round, this one is definitely one of the better ones in my opinion, though there's a lot of repeated conversations that make it through the episodes. Bailey brings up the sympathy votes to Victoria, and at this point, who fucking cares? They and Todd mention that they need to target Lexus now, and she mentions that she's probably a target for the other side. Despite all of that, Victoria speaks to Anthony about how she better be his number one, and Lexus enters the room to hear Victoria's explanation, where Lexus literally says nothing in the conversation, which pisses Victoria off. Anthony wins HOH, and he immediately plans to backdoor Victoria, ignoring the fact that you can't backdoor someone in the final 5. He has a conversation with Bailey where it is clear that she is going to be nominated, but she calls it out immediately and also mentions that he wants Lexus and herself at the final 3 because they both would choose him, which ends up being accurate. He then bashes Victoria to Bailey so the seeds can be planted, and he explains his plan to send Victoria home. Victoria throws Todd under the bus to Anthony, and he uses this against her in his conversation with Todd, and also drops seeds to Lexis about Victoria. Lexis, Todd, and Bailey all talk about Victoria and how horrible she is, which gets tiring throughout their week, despite me not really liking Victoria much at all. Anthony nominates Todd and Lexis for eviction. Anthony is not over Victoria selling his game to other people in the house. And because her numbers are gone, she now wants to go to the final two with him. Honestly, I don't think he's reading the latter part correctly at all, despite reading the former part correctly. In general, it is clear that he believes that he cannot beat her in the final two, so he's coming up with this rationale to get rid of her, but he's never admitting to this, and he never admits this part of it to her or to anyone throughout the rest of the season, which honestly is annoying. We see Victoria talk to Bailey and Todd, and you can tell the editors are having so much fun with how not aware of the situation she is at this point. We have a bunch of scenes with Victoria speaking to the others and them just talking behind her back, and it's tiring. Todd wins his third consecutive veto, and Anthony is thrilled that his plan is working, with the other three celebrating downstairs. We then skip to an hour before the ceremony, and Victoria speaks to Anthony about Bailey going up, where he mentions that Bailey and Todd told him about the final three with them, which she tells him to not believe. Anthony tells Bailey that she has a feeling that she is going up, and then he mentions that she told the other evicted woman that he will win if he goes to the end. So they start arguing, and she claims that he is playing her. Victoria mentions that she was pretending to be on the other side to feed information to him. This part is definitely accurate, and he mentions that Bailey told him that Victoria wanted her to target him the entire season. Despite Victoria's pleas, Todd takes himself off the block and Anthony nominates Victoria as the replacement nominee. Victoria mentions that she thinks Anthony is using all the stuff and rationale as an excuse, since he knows that she's a threat to win, and I actually agree with her on this. There's a bunch of he said, she said happening right now, and we see a tense conversation with Bailey and Victoria due to all of these stories, and Bailey mentions that she feels bamboozled, and she's still not over the votes last week. Shut the fuck up at this point about this stupid vote that was a sympathy vote. Anyways, we have more of the same conversations with Victoria and Anthony, which is getting redundant at this point, and everyone talking about her is getting redundant as well. Victoria joins the conversation and calls them out for talking shit about her, where things are tense now. Victoria tells Anthony that he's going to go out like trash for the move that he made, and he calls her out for her eye rolls and the stuff she said. The two of them start yelling at the top of their lungs, and he is over her not taking accountability, where she states that he's making a huge mistake, with this actually being one of the main reasons why he loses. That isn't incorrect, since him making the move to send her out personally made things worse, and a person like Victoria was always going to be bitter at the person who sent her home, so maybe he should have thought about sending her home pre-jury. That's beside the point. They continue arguing in the H room, and he brings up the Matt and Kayla situations, and he says, "You've been switching up, yo!" And it gets so heated to the point where she breaks a glass, and production forces her to clean it up, and then they argue in the huge hallways. Victoria is evicted in a unanimous 2-0 vote. Victoria really isn't a likable person, and I felt like this even in her first season. But you can't deny that she's a very entertaining player and a personality, and there really is no one like her. So she brought a lot to the season when it came to her personality, her commentary, and the amount of drama that she caused. As a game player, she did improve because she actually had a bunch of alliances. At the same time, I'm questioning if a lot of it had to do with her actually improving her skill sets compared to her first season, or if it was due to veteran privilege, and this cast really working out for her. That's something that I'm having to go back and forth on, that I'll delve more into in the game player tier ranking video. At the same time, when I think of the season, I think of her. So that definitely says something about the amount of impact that she had. But I don't know if she's going to be the most improved player like Aika was on her first or on her second season compared to her first. I really don't have much of anything to say about this final week. It's kind of just a standard final week. Anyway, so let's just get right to it. Victoria outed the Hot Chocolate Alliance before she left, and Bailey has a lot of questions about it. But Anthony admits to all of the members, but Lexis being in it, though he mentions her name in it, which Bailey accurately clocks, and he knows that he isn't admitting to Lexis being in it because she is the only one that is still in the game. Bailey wins HOH, and we see Kuzi and Jetson host the BBCAN Awards. Bailey nominates Todd and Lexis for eviction, and she didn't nominate Anthony because he didn't nominate her last week. Bailey mentioned wanting to target Anthony, but I don't know how much I really believe in regards to this at this point. Lexis wins the final veto of the season, and it's obvious that she's going to keep Anthony over Todd, so I'm not even going to waste time analyzing the useless footage. Of course, Lexis votes to evict Todd. I really do not get the hype around Todd, and I feel like he fits the perfect stereotype or archetype that Canada and people tend to fall over. A young, conventionally attractive white man who is from the Eastern Canada who has a Maritimes accent and they just eat it up. Even though he was very boring on the show, he didn't even really care to play the game. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing, and I feel like that privilege carried him throughout the season. And I guess I can't blame him for using that privilege to his advantage, but it definitely wasn't fun to watch as a personality or as a player. And he was one of the several guys who really just didn't add anything to the season. Anthony wins part 1 of the final HOH, and Bailey wins part 2 of the final HOH. Anthony wins part 3, meaning that he's the final HOH of the season, and decides to vote to evict Lexis, which was most definitely a shocker to me, since I thought he would have taken her, since she would have been the easier person to beat, but clearly Anthony didn't think that. I don't really know what to think about Lexis as a player and a personality. She seemed like she had a decent grasp of what was happening in the game, or she had the right feet on her shoulders, or however that a right head of sorry, she had a nice head on her shoulders. That's the proper saying. But a lot of people didn't really trust her. They didn't really like her, and it didn't really seem like she did a whole lot in the game, as she kind of just rode the wave with whatever Anthony and that little side of the house wanted to do, and she never really had much agency at all. A lot of people compared her to Taylor due to a lot of people not liking her, especially the women, and them being pretty women with African ancestry. So I feel like a lot of people overtly stand for her in that regard, but I also don't remember a moment where she did anything entertaining either. So she's kind of just meh and very forgettable now that I'm really thinking about it. But she seems like a nice person, so yeah. For some reason, the pre-jurors were out in the audience when the jury questioned the finalists, which I have never seen on a Big Brother season. I have no idea why they did this, and so many things could have went wrong, like giving the jury information through facial expressions and stuff like that before they voted, or other signals. Elijah asks Bailey about her biggest mistake in the season and what she did to recover from it, and her answer is playing too loyally to certain people and realizing that when she saved Victoria, who wasn't as loyal, and she recovered by letting her go. I don't really recall when she saved Victoria, or when Victoria was in a position where she was in so much danger where Bailey needed to save her, but I could be wrong. I don't really know or care at this point. Kayla asks Anthony about portraying himself as a loyal hot chocolate member, but he dismantled it, so why should they believe him? He responded that he loved the idea and initiative of the alliance, but he would be an idiot to go to the end with 4 strong black women who would have booted him at 5th, so he needed to create a route that would get him to the final 2. Avery asks Bailey about a move that she made that was solely made by her, and Bailey mentions that the number one move she made was creating a relationship with Anthony, despite wanting him out in the beginning of the season, so she was honest with him. She gave Victoria an HOH and took Todd off the block, which showed her loyalty. Tola asks Bailey why Anthony should lose and responds that she played harder, was more honest and loyal, and she has proven herself as an established woman, and she went to the end with a king. But he doesn't make much moves, as kings don't do, and is protected, i.e. kings are protected, i.e. Anthony. And Bailey is the most powerful person because she wore her heart on her sleeve. Victoria asks Anthony about them having a final 2 and how she never targeted him, but then lied about what Kayla and Avery said, and then he sent her home, so why should she vote for him? He understands why she is mad, and they held one another's hands personally and professionally for most of the season. But she made the same promises to other people in the season, and she did turn on him a few times, so he needed to take her out. Todd asks Anthony about rubbing some feathers in the jury and which betrayal was the most instrumental for him getting to the final two. And he mentions, or he responds, that the betrayal of Victoria was the most pivotal since she was a strong player, especially socially in the house, despite it hurting personally. Lexis asks Anthony about evicting her when he preached loyalty, and he responds that he isn't a perfect Big Brother player, and he might have made a mistake, but he thought that Bailey was more beatable than her in the final two, and he apologizes to her. Bailey's final speech is about people playing the game as someone who they aren't on average, but she played as herself and put her heart out there, and she was loyal. She mentions that she wanted a woman to win, so she made a woman's alliance, and she had to create other relationships, but she wasn't afraid of anyone, hence Anthony, so she was brutally honest with him, which caused him to respect her, which is why she made it so far. She was targeted many times but had a good social game and won competitions that she needed to win, so they have the same amount of competition wins. Anthony's final speech is about how he was going through the most difficult times in his life, mentioning that he lost his job of 14 years recently, having to bury his best friend a week before joining the season, and his mother going through several health issues. He had a huge target on his back, and he did lie and betray people, but he couldn't sit in the final two with anyone, and the game is about influence, control, and power. Richie has fit all of those, and you can tell that he knew he lost already and is frustrated by this point in time, though he does apologize. He mentions that he has never been nominated to go on the block in 2 seasons, and he has a great social game as well as 2 HOHs. Bailey ends up winning the season in a 6-1 vote. One thing I will say about Anthony this season is that they actually knew how to edit him here, where he was invisible for at least half of Big Brother Canada 7 because they didn't know how to edit him and they gave way too much screen time to Dane and Adam and their HOH wins and especially Adam's drama, where it kind of overlooked what he was doing. Here, Anthony was front and center from the very beginning, and he's also one of the people that I think of when I think of the season. He definitely had to play differently, or played with a different group of people this season, since there wasn't a lot of men that he could work with, and there wasn't going to be a Pretty Boys 2.0. So he worked most of the season with the women, while still having good relationships with the men. At the same time, I don't know how close his actual relationships were, and it was kind of the same with BBCAN7, where a lot of people liked him, but I don't know if those relationships were very close. And he definitely misread a few situations at the end. At the same time, I do think he was the recipient of a lot of hypocrisy with some of the women that he was working with. At the same time, I don't really know how much he actively learned from his last season and implemented into this season, but he was definitely very entertaining to watch, and it'll be interesting going over his gameplay in the next video. Bailey is definitely very entertaining, and she's one of the very few newbies who was able to keep up with the veterans on an entertainment and a personality point of view, as she was always given a lot of visibility. She had a lot of great one-liners and confessionals, and she really was just herself, and it made her very entertaining and very unique. At the same time, I do think she was definitely entitled in a lot of the season, and if she was a different demographic, or even if she was a man, I don't know if how she acted when it came to her gameplay and just asserting herself in all of these conversations that had nothing to do with her would have worked. She definitely had some good reads at the She had a lot of good reads throughout a lot of the season, but I don't know how much of her strategy was actually intentional or not, or if it's just a bunch of the women protecting her that caused her to be able to do decently, since she did have a target on her back. It'll be interesting to go over her gameplay in the next video, but she's definitely very entertaining, electric, and I'm glad that someone like her is our most likely final winner in Big Brother Canada, though it would have been cool to see Anthony win. But it's been 6 years since a woman won Big Brother Canada, so I guess it was about time. So, in conclusion, this season of Big Brother Canada is definitely a mixed bag. When it comes to the gameplay and the events of the season, it comes off as very interesting. At the same time, I do think the cast is on the weaker end, and a lot of this is due to the dynamics between the mixed seasons, where even if the veterans weren't on the season, I don't know how strong a lot of this cast would be on a character and a gameplay point of view. So I can't even just blame it on the fact that it is a mixed season. There was definitely some drama in the season, and it was pretty entertaining enough for the most part. But when I think about the season, I don't really see any iconic moments or anything that's going to stand out 10 years from now that everyone's still going to be talking about. And it doesn't reach the height of the best of the Big Brother Canada seasons. So, just from my immediate thoughts, I would probably have this in the lower to middle tier. So, not the bottom two or the bottom three seasons, but a bit above that. What I am going to do is in a year, I am going to re-rank the Big Brother Canada seasons where I will include this season and I'll have some more distance from it to see where I would place it. And I'm going to update my BBCAN players tier rankings in a year once the BBCAN12 game player tier ranking is settled. And then I'll go wait a year to see how I feel about the season and the cast and where I rank them with the other 10 seasons. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. And I'm probably going to talk about the BP Canada cancellation or quote unquote hiatus in more details in another video. But yeah, so you can follow me on my other channel and on my social media. All the information's in the description box, and I'll be posting videos on both channels very soon. Hope you all take care. Bye!